What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated podcast, episode 167 on this Thursday, April the 17th, 2025. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with you on a Thursday. The transfer portal is open. Movement has been had. Oklahoma got off to a blazing hot start on Tuesday night. We see you, Jim Nagy. We're going to talk about it. The two guys that they picked up, obviously one major splash mixed in there, and then get into what's next. What are some of the other targets? At what positions could we see Oklahoma chasing? We do have specific names. We're going to get into all of it. The right guy to talk about here, our man Collin Kennedy, who's been all over the portal coverage over Sooners Illustrated. We also will recap the weekend that was on the recruiting side a little bit as well out of the Crimson Combine. We talked last week about all the guys that were coming into town. What was the reaction coming out of that thing that we all saw? We'll talk about it at the back end of the show as well. But CK, let's talk about portal. That's going to dominate the conversation right now for the next, couple of weeks. We talked, I think last week a little bit, and also just you and I, planning out the shows and just kind of chatting that, this window is not going to be as much of a circus as the winter, right? I mean, it's not going to be 20 guys out, 20 guys in. Probably more like 5 and 5, or even maybe less. We'll see.
Sure.
But it got off to a heck of a start on Tuesday. Before the portal technically even opened, Oklahoma got one of the most coveted players in the portal, period. Not just one of Oklahoma's most coveted players, but he is, but one of the most coveted players in the portal, period, in Cal running back Jaydn. Huge pickup. The fact that they got him on Tuesday and they signed him on Tuesday, he didn't even really talk to other teams or take any visits. Oklahoma got the guy that you talk to anyone in college football was one of the most highly sought after running backs in the portal. Was kind of banged up last year, but had a monster 2023 season, over 1,300 yards that year. Everyone thinks this guy's as an NFL running back, and Oklahoma went out and they just plucked him right at the start of this cycle. Collin, talk about, from your understanding, how they did it, but then also what this means. Put it in perspective. I think a lot of Oklahoma fans were totally like, how good is this guy? Really good. To explain it to everyone. This was a big deal.
What's cool is we normally this time of year or in these spans of time in regards to the window, we have to talk a lot about the needs. We rarely ever get to talk about the wants. And Oklahoma kind of wanted this guy bad. I think this was an individual that Jim Nagy specifically kind of sunk his teeth into the recruitment before it even really began and said, this is a player that we've identified that I want on this roster.
Yeah.
And credit to Jim Nagy and the new look front office at Oklahoma. They went out and they got a player who arguably now becomes the top running back in the SEC going into the 2025 season. And that's not my opinion, by the way. That is the opinion of others. And as I've surveyed the landscape and kind of looked at what the general consensus is in regards to this move, like Oklahoma legitimately went out and got one of the top 10 running backs in all of college football. And now the Sooners might go into the season with maybe the best running back in the SEC, if not the best, at least top 2 or 3, to go along with John Mateer at the quarterback position. Genuinely one of the most impressive new look backfields thanks to the transfer portal that Oklahoma has put together. And Oklahoma, I think that OU has maybe unfairly at times been discussed as a program that isn't necessarily able to go out and get moves done like this. And Jim Nagy specifically has suddenly redirected that conversation and kind of reasserted Oklahoma as one of the dominant brands in college football and a program that quite honestly can go out and get someone if they really want them. And the other thing that I'll say on this, kind of to the part of the question of yours, like, what does this do for OU? Do I believe it fixes anything? No, probably not. But I think at the very least, number one, it gives you a fallback option. And what I mean by that is if you're still questionable about the offensive line, well, we all know a good running back can elevate a front 5 group. And number two, I don't know that this necessarily addresses the passing game, but Jaydn, not only an extremely talented runner, very talented pass catcher out of the backfield. You're at least giving someone with the ball in his hands to John Mateer, who can become an elite check down, go make a play kind of guy in this passing scheme. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And the last thing I will say, I understand it's a new offense. I get it. But think about this. I was thinking about this yesterday. Think about the best version of Oklahoma you saw last season. I would probably say it was the game against Alabama, where, again, different offense, all that. But what was OU doing offensively? Running the ball almost every single play and establishing the ground game and running it down the Crimson Tide's throat. OU with an established running back next to the caliber of quarterback like John Mateer. Obviously, the passing game is a thing, but you can never understate the value, or overstate, I should say, the value of a good run game. Jaydn is bringing a lot to the table for Oklahoma.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, this is a guy, I love his ability to get out and catch passes. You know, his freshman season, he caught 46 passes. 2 years ago, 26 passes. I mean, he's caught some touchdowns. That's something that I like Oklahoma's running back room, but that's not really something that you're going to be looking for Xavier Robinson to do, or Javonte Barnes to do, or Gavin Sawchuk to do. That's an angle. That's an element that Jaydn provides that I don't know if they necessarily had before, outside of maybe Taylor Tatum. But yeah, I mean, like you said, arguably the best running back in the SEC. He's obviously, I think, running back one on this team. I mean, we'll see how it shakes out. I mean, he's getting here after the spring, which is always a little bit tougher. We don't have spring ball, but it's a huge pickup. And, when you pair him with John Mateer, I mean, you're looking at, they got the most coveted portal quarterback, and they got, I won't say the most coveted portal running back, but up there. It's quite a cycle. Yeah. And what a start for Jim Nagy. I mean, just to identify him, it was making the rounds. He had a tweet like a year ago when he obviously saw the Senior Bowl talking about how much he liked Jaydn then. So this was clearly a guy that he identified a long time ago as this guy can play and as an NFL, body and all that. And when he got this job, it seems like he zeroed in pretty quick and they made it happen. Big splash. What a way to kind of kick off the spring portal for Oklahoma on Tuesday, because that was a statement, and we'll see how it shakes out the rest of that room. Also, you had Sam Franklin enter the portal, so you did go 1 for 1 there. We'll see if there's any more movement, but you've got a lot of depth there now, and this is a guy that, he is a legitimate X factor on your offense. So big pickup, an exciting pickup to say the least, with Jaydn. Look no further than just the reaction nationally. I mean, this one turned heads nationally. Everyone kind of saying, is OU going to have a good offense? They might. They just might. Elsewhere on that offense, they made another pickup on Tuesday. Again, great start for Jim Nagy with Jake Maikkula, who we talked about last week, Stanford offensive lineman at 11 starts last year. He can play some center, which is huge because outside of Troy Everett, who do you really feel good about playing center on this roster? They brought him in on Tuesday as well. Obviously, they added Luke Baklenko back in the spring, so their second Stanford offensive line. They also had Derek Simmons, who had a great camp, and they needed offensive line help. They went and they've got some. They've had 3 guys, in this portal class since the end of last year. And obviously, hopefully you stay healthier this time. What do you make of the pickup here? We talked a little bit about Jake last week, of course, but now that he's actually in the boat, where do you envision when that 2 deep drops in August? Like, where, backup center Troy Everett, could he work his way into a guard role? I mean, what's your kind of envision? Or what do you kind of envision for how Maikkula will kind of fit in here? But it seems like another nice pickup at the very least as a depth at the very least.
Certainly a little bit of both, but I would just say in general, this gives you that, and I know that people will roll their eyes, the competitive depth that you're looking for, right? Or at least Brent Venables and that staff that they want, especially in that offensive line room. And on one side, you have the dynamic of, okay, Troy Everett, probably pretty entrenched as the starting center and a leader of this football team going into 2025, barring Maikkula coming in and looking like someone who can overtake him. I would expect Everett to be the guy there.
Me too.
But Maikkula comes in, and whether he is the backup center now, and Everett, we know, has a bit of an injury history, and you have to account for that, especially after what was seen in 2024. But then Maikkula can, at 6'5", 295 to 300 pounds, you have to assume they'll get that play weight up a little bit, which I think, honestly, watching the tape, has to be part of that dynamic. I think Maikkula needs to come into Schmidt's program and add a little bit of play strength. If he can, then maybe there's a world where he also makes things a little bit more interesting at guard. But I think the number one thing for me is you are going into 2025 with a primary objective of protecting your primary asset in John Mateer. And I look at Maikkula as someone who was one of, if not arguably, the best pass protector on Stanford's offensive line a year ago. Even moving around a little bit in that front five was very highly graded at PFF from a pass protection efficiency standpoint. And so for that guy to be someone who can come off the bench in a dire situation and be very capable in making sure that your quarterback is staying upright, tremendous value. And so to beat out UCLA, to get this guy, I mean, again, you're getting a transfer portal offensive lineman with multiple years of starting experience before the window even opens. Almost another kind of reiteration of the fact that Jim Nagy, Brent Venables, and crew, they're very serious about how much they're seeing an opportunity in the spring window.
It's April 17th, so I'm not going to hold you to it, but would you like to take a stab at Oklahoma's offensive line right now? Because you could talk me into a lot. Obviously, I think I agree. I think Troy Everett's going to be your center. You know, where do you go from there? I mean, Fabechi Nwewu is back. Jacob Sexton back, you would think, at a tackle spot. Logan Howland, Hito Zaida, though, were mid-spring. Where you kind of feel like that offensive line is right now, if you had to take a stab at it. I think we're not going to hold you to it, but
I would say this.
Great camp.
Fasusi had a great camp. Logan Howland and Hito Zaida, to me, are starting caliber players going into next season. I would throw Hito Zaida at left guard, Troy Everett at center, and I feel pretty good about those two being there. Logan Howland, to me, what he showed at the back end of last year, I believe that is a starting caliber offensive tackle in the SEC. I was thinking about this morning, though. Is there any world where he can move to the right tackle position and Fasusi takes left? Or probably a little bit more likely, in my opinion, Logan Howland at left tackle. I know Jacob Sexton will be in the mix at left as well with Fasusi and Howland.
Sure.
Jake Taylor is still back for now at right tackle, but Derek Simmons, like you know how much I think is there with Derek Simmons. I believe he's been getting a majority of the reps at the right tackle spot with the ones, and then I think Fabechi and Eddie Pierre-Louis battling out at right guard. So if I had to give you the most likely, it would probably go Derek Simmons, Fabechi, Everett, Hito Zaida, Logan Howland. Maybe the most fun?
Yeah.
Fasusi, Ozaida, Everett, Maikkula. I mean, it could be Maikkula, Eddie Pierre-Louis, Fabechi, and then either Derek Simmons or Logan Howland over on the right side. But this, honestly, the two, almost the three deep at offensive line, Josh, like the fall is going to be fascinating because now there is legitimately an argument to make. I mean, we haven't even mentioned a guy like Ryan Foje. A lot of these dudes in that room can compete for a starting job this fall.
Daniel Akinkunmi also. I mean, he looks incredible right now. The depth is in a far better place. Obviously, last year, there's not many offensive lines that would have still excelled with the just carnage that they had at the beginning of last year. But
100%.
They feel, a little more equipped to handle if there is a lot of guys that go down this time around. And, I also, too, this seems like there's this misnomer that the offensive line was just completely garbage last year. And it was rough. Don't get me wrong. It was rough. Yeah. But in the back end of the year, when they finally got some stability and guys were healthy, it was fine. Like I don't really get that. Like, it's almost like, when they were playing their, fourth string center, like, obviously it was bad. I'm not going to argue with you. It was really bad. They had, how many sacks was it against Ole Miss? Like 10. But in the back end of the year, with the way Hito Zaida and Logan Howland came on, it was much, much better. Again, elite, obviously not, but it was much better. So there's reasons, I think, to be optimistic, certainly, with what they've added and some of these guys take another step forward. I think Bill Beanbo, he's in a pretty good spot. And the depth is obviously, like you said, in as good of a spot as it's been in a while, really.
Yeah. One last thing to mention on Maikkula, because I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. He is a graduate transfer, but unlike Jaydn, Maikkula has 2 seasons of eligibility. So even if he factors in later down the line, maybe Troy Everett's the guy at center this year, very real possibility that Maikkula kind of develops under Bill Beanbo and then takes over the starting center role, and you get a little bit of continuity at the center position going into that 2026 season in the SEC.
Good note there. Great start for Jim Nagy. Obviously, they just
killing it.
They just seem like they have a very clear kind of plan what they want to do, and it's off to a great start, to say the least. Now, as far as what's next, so they got a couple of big pickups here. Obviously, the big splash with Ott, and then a position of need with Maikkula. What's kind of next? We have a few positions here I want to ask you about. Let's start with wide receiver, which is certainly one that, is a hot button conversation. A lot of fans feel like they need to add a wide receiver. Obviously, this spring they had Jaydn Gibson have his setback. He didn't really participate in spring, I think, at all, really. And then Giovanni Gibson, who had a great camp, went down toward the end of it. Brent Venables made it sound like he could maybe be back by the start of the season. That's probably pretty optimistic. You would think they would look to probably add in this position, especially after last year where there was just injury after injury after injury. Deion Burks is healthy right now. Hopefully they can keep him that way. He's very, very talented, but he's been kind of snake bitten since he's been here at OU. For you, wide receiver, names to know, what's kind of the latest there as they try to add to Emmett Jones' room, a position that's in a pretty good spot, but you would feel better if you had at least another guy, I think, probably in there.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to bring up for the context of this, I think that in my reporting on the Giovanni Gibson situation, I probably didn't do a very good job of clarifying what I meant, but what I was trying to vocalize is kind of the way that this thing is playing out. Essentially, what I was saying was, at the time, it was like, oh no, Giovanni Gibson's hurt. This is the end of the world.
Yeah.
And I get it. But what my message was, look, you get an ounce of good news, a miracle in a sense of some good news on the Giovanni Gibson front, you're still looking okay on paper for the fall. Now, knock on wood, right? But like, as of right now, especially the way that I see it, Giovanni Gibson to me doesn't necessarily have to be rushed back onto the field until you play that Michigan game a couple weeks into the season. And so if he's able to make it back for the Michigan game, and we've seen that Oklahoma will kind of take that calculated approach with recovery timetables, especially at the receiver position, like you add another body or two to that receiver room, depending on what the turnover looks like, and you're not just fine. Like you might be in pretty good position moving forward. And so within the context of knowing like Giovanni Gibson's probably still going to play, I think that you look at Xavier Lloyd to start. Xavier Lloyd, former Illinois State wide receiver, started his career at Kansas State, was a walk-on. And when I was digging into this player, I think some people know my kind of soft spot, my affinity for K-State as a program. A lot of respect for what they do. I talked to some folks around the program and people who are familiar with Xavier Lloyd and his journey. People rave about this guy. They love him. And so to no surprise, whenever he's hopped in the portal after a productive year last year, already facing a very competitive portal process, and Oklahoma is expected to very much be a part of that. I think from what Xavier was telling me yesterday, he is hoping to visit Oklahoma next week. He's at least aiming to, but he's expected to go on a number of other trips leading up to that. And he's kind of got to make it there, right? We have to see whether or not he decides to shut things down ahead of time. But I do believe that if and when Oklahoma gets Xavier Lloyd on campus, they would have a real opportunity. Now, it's probably going to come down to the number, right? Let's just be objective.
Yeah.
And I think Oklahoma's whole thing right now is let's be calculated and patient with our spending at the receiver spot, considering, again, we think that Gibson's going to come back and we're pretty set in general in that room. Let's make sure we're not overspending to kind of round out the group. If Lloyd is too high, then they probably pivot to some of the other names I'm getting ready to talk about. But I still think that as long as Xavier Lloyd's open and on the market and he's on track to get into campus at OU, Sooners have a shot because they've been connected to him now for a while behind the scenes. Let's say that things kind of go awry and Lloyd comes off the table. Keon Brown, former OU signee who, if you'll remember back in the day, we broke the news at Sooners Illustrated that Keon was not going to make it and he was going to go take the junior college route. And it sounded like he had a really good, productive career out there and is now at least going to be eligible to play FBS college football. I think we still got to get there. But Keon Brown, if everything tracks, I'm calling him and then the other guy in Trajan Bridges, who we mentioned a show ago, back burner options in a sense. But Keon, he still has to work through his process. And then Trajan Bridges, I think Oklahoma and Trajan Bridges are both kind of keeping each other at an arm's distance. I believe Bridges is visiting Utah. I think I saw Chris Hummer put out a report that the Utes will get Bridges potentially on campus here pretty soon. And I think Oklahoma, while interested in communication, I think there's kind of a mutual understanding of the difficulty of the situation there, right? And so we'll see. The last thing that I think people will ask me, and I'll probably include his name in like a final note tomorrow in the daily portal notes that I've been putting up. Terrell Davis, the former UCO wide receiver. I don't see him as an option for Oklahoma right now. He visited Tulsa. Oklahoma State is on him heavily. So 2 out of the 3 big in-state schools are after him. I talked to a source at Tulsa that's probably not overly optimistic, and it sounds like the Cowboys specifically are trying to lock that one down. And so kind of the state of the receiver room. If Lloyd comes off the board and the other 2 are still out there, I still think Oklahoma is going to be looking to add a couple other names to the board. And again, I think they're going to let things play out here because we're still very early into this window.
Yeah, Xavier Lloyd last year, 66 catches, 912 yards, 6'2", just short of 200 pounds. So obviously it'd be a nice add, like you said, Kansas State. So Power 5 experience, Power 4 these days. That room's in kind of an interesting spot because I really think, honestly, last year, and this might sound kind of crazy, that even with all the injuries, it was still, I think, more about the offense than that room, if that makes sense.
I agree.
Like, even at the end of the year, like you got Zion Kearney out there that we both think can still be a really good player. You saw Jacob Jordan do some nice things down the stretch, like Ivan Carry on bowl game. It's like that room has got talent in it, and you went and added a bunch. Josiah Martin had a very nice Crimson Combine, whatever that means. He's made a few nice plays. After you had Jordan back, you have Deion Burks again, who looks healthy and great right now. Just can you please keep him that way? Because he was great in the Crimson Combine. He had several big plays, and just good to see him moving well. You had Isaiah Satania. Obviously, you hope Giovanni Gibson can be back, and then these freshmen look great. Elijah Thomas and Manny Choice, both are physical specimens. So it's not like you are desperate, but it would be nice. Right. And so we'll see what they can do with whether it's Lloyd or if he goes somewhere else. Do they pivot or go to one of the backup kind of options, like you said? We'll kind of see. But that room is an interesting spot. A lot of microscope on it, a lot of scrutiny after what happened last year, which was kind of just bad luck, really. But you compound that with the fact that Giovanni Gibson now gets hurt after he was having a great camp. So we'll see. But that room's not in a horrible place, but it wouldn't hurt, kind of is where I'm at.
Yeah. Keontae Lewis hopefully gets a little bit healthier. He's been banged up. And then we're awaiting word on Jaydn Gibson, right? So we'll find out. I mean, to me, it's like this room looks really, really good if you kind of get the luxury edition of like a bigger bodied, almost like X receiver type to move the chains and feed off of guys like Giovanni Gibson as a deep vertical threat, Isaiah Satania, who's kind of a fun layered slot option. And you've got a lot of role players in that room. But if you're kind of recruiting and pursuing in the portal a specific type of receiver, doesn't really make a ton of sense to sell the farm for that kind of guy when you should be able to kind of, play it out within your terms.
Sure. Yeah, I don't see much of a need to drop, like you're saying, a massive number on one of these high-profile names that are in there. Just doesn't seem like that's what I was going to do, and it probably isn't what they should do. So
I mean, did you see the Fran Brown thing from Syracuse that one of their receivers at the portal, and he's like, "I'm not giving no $2 million."
Yeah, we're seeing a bit of
I was like, $2 million
Nico stuff. Yeah, the Nico stuff. It's like teams are kind of like taking a stand a little bit of like, no, we're not paying you that. But of course, Nico ended up at UCLA. I don't know what he's making, but he's probably not hurting. Put it that way. Another position that everyone loves to talk about. It's been
here we go
heavily discussed for multiple years now, really. Tight end. So obviously we talked about it a little bit last week. Would they look to add a tight end? You still have a bunch of guys in that room. Devon Mitchell obviously moved on. He's officially in the portal now. Will Huggins had a nice camp. He was somebody that Ben Arbuckle was quick to bring up pretty much every chance he got. Carson Kent had a pretty decent camp as well. He looked pretty good in the Crimson Combine on Saturday. Again, I don't know what to make of that, but just saying it to say it, he had some nice moments. Ben Arbuckle said after the game, post-game, I don't know if post-game is the right word, post-combine, that the tight end room was the room that he felt improved the most from the beginning of the spring to the end. Now, they were the furthest probably starting point, so context.
Considering the floor.
Yeah, considering where they were at after last year, a bunch of new guys and Jaron Kanek was flipping positions and everything else. Where do you think Oklahoma is in terms of adding a tight end? How aggressive will they be in doing so? And, what are some names there? Is this something that Oklahoma is dead set? We need another guy, or is it kind of the same as wide receiver? Like we'd like, but we're not going to break the bank for it. Where are they kind of at with tight end?
Yeah. So one of the storylines of the portal that I included in my first daily update notebook was that when you talk to people in the sport, they acknowledged the fact that three big brands in college football were primarily associated with the tight end position going into the spring window. That was Oklahoma, that was Texas, and that was Alabama. Mm-hmm. Those three kind of blue blood programs have a, for lack of a better term, desperate need at the tight end position. And it was expected that all three were going to be willing to spend at that spot. Now, yesterday, after kind of acknowledging that storyline, I put out in my second daily update notebook the fact that Jack Endries, another Cal guy, who was named by PFF the number 2 returning tight end in all of college football, would be hitting the portal, and that Oklahoma was expected to be involved with Texas and Indiana. I put that out before he actually hit the portal. A couple hours later, Endries goes in the portal. A few hours after that, lo and behold, Texas gets on the phone immediately and books a visit with him to get him out to Austin. Already, the Longhorns have a prediction in from our Hank South over at Horns 24/7 in their favor. I'm obviously hearing that Endries is going to get a pretty aggressive package from Texas to try and convince him to stay in Austin. And then Indiana was the other program, like I mentioned, hovering around. Many kind of believed going in that Indiana would be able to kind of get out in front of this thing because they have Endries' former quarterback who transferred over from Cal, and I guess those two are very close. And then also, obviously, Indiana, Big Ten program, a little bit of a track record at the tight end position at the program in the league. And then Indiana, I mean, recent on-field success. So it's a attractive destination for a guy like Andries on paper. And so I bring all of this up to essentially say, if Texas is 1, and people are now kind of saying like, okay, Texas 1, maybe Indiana 2. If Oklahoma's at 3, it's probably not looking good for their top target at the position. Now, could he show up on campus? Maybe. I mean, at the time of recording, that's probably not going to happen. You never know, though, right? And so I think OU will continue to recruit Andries, but if he were to land at Texas or even in Indiana, I do think that there are a couple of other names to know. Now, I want to go ahead and acknowledge someone right off the top. Tanner Koziel, the former Ball State tight end, he was linked to Oklahoma in the winter window. But I think that people forget OU's – I'm trying to think of a nice way to phrase it. They weren't overly involved with Koziel to maybe the degree in which the public perceived. They were in it. But at the time when Koziel went in the winter window, it became very apparent that the guy was going to command a number that was maybe a little bit rich. Now, what I think is important to acknowledge, and this is another kind of tricky situation to tackle, but I think it's very important because I think a lot of the fans out there are seeing a lot of other fans hype up Koziel as an option. It's like, oh no, Koziel to OU. I'm not there yet because I'll put it this way. Do yourself a favor and go down the rabbit hole of searching Tanner Koziel on Twitter or X and kind of see the stuff that's come out. It's not overly serious, but like allegedly it didn't go well at Wisconsin in the few weeks he spent on campus.
Yeah.
There are people who are speculating that Luke Fickell kind of called Koziel out in a roundabout way in a press conference. And now obviously the two parties have split after a very short amount of time together. And I'm not sure that whether it's the first layer with kind of the inflated number potential or now this new context of, okay, Koziel went to a place and it didn't really work out all that well in a very abbreviated span.
Sure.
I don't know. I just right now I would encourage those listening to pump the brakes a little bit relative to maybe what other people out there are saying about Koziel. I do, however, like a couple other cats that are out there that are being linked to Oklahoma. Lance Mason, formerly of Missouri State, one of the most productive tight ends in the FCS during the 2024 season. And then Gavin Hoffman, a former 4-star recruit who went to Iowa, spent 1 year with the Hawkeyes and is now in the portal. So a more inexperienced guy, but a lot of upside and a younger player who you would potentially be bringing into the room to have around for a while. I think that's kind of the pair to know moving forward. And Koziel is visiting Houston today. I wouldn't be surprised if Oklahoma tries to line up a couple of trips with either Mason or Hoffman or both, especially given where things are at with Andries. So that's the state of the tight end position as things currently stand. It's a lot, but as we kind of expected, this was going to be the number one position group to sort through during the spring window for the Sooners.
So it sounds like you do expect them to add a body here.
I'd be shocked if they don't.
Okay.
I'd be shocked. I mean, I would argue that maybe even more than receiver, they would like to add someone here. Now, you could debate me on kicker. Shocking as that is. You could try to convince me kicker. We'll get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I just think that they've really kind of realized, like, especially with someone like Andries and some of these other guys that have gone in that like make a lot of sense as scholarship tight ends. I really think that they want to kind of address that room and put a lot of minds at ease, if you will.
For sure. It's a position in a weird place. We talked about it a lot the last couple of years. Since Braden Willis moved on, there's really kind of been they've been searching for it. finding that next guy. And, OU fans were used to for a very long time having a game-breaking tight end. It was kind of one of those things you took for granted, really, frankly. Like, they're going to have a tight end that will make a big impact in the passing game. And I'm not here to say that definitively Will Huggins can't be that guy or Carson Kent or whatever. Those guys did have nice springs. But, if you were to add someone, that another guy who was productive last year, just to give you more options, it just gives you more possibilities. So I agree that they should chase another tight end. And it sounds like they are and are probably going to add one. So I think that's the right move. And so far, it's very early, but not questioning what Jim Nagy's done to this point. So we'll give him a shot here to try and fix the tight end position, for lack of a better term there. You just mentioned it. One other position we did want to talk about, kicker. The kickers from last year are gone. Zach Schmidt, Tyler Keltner. They added is a Welch, right? The kicker from Kennesaw State. I want to make sure I got that. They had the kicker and the punter, so I had to stop for a moment. Austin Welch. Yeah. Also, you have Liam Evans, the young guy from Oklahoma from Moore previously. We talked about it a little bit earlier in the week on Monday at the Combine, and that's just one practice, so you don't do too much. The kicking game was putrid in the Combine on Saturday. Just miss after miss after miss on field goals. Some that were missing the net, it was ugly, and that was one of the main takeaways coming out. You talk to anyone afterward about the Combine, it took 2 sentences for someone to be like, the kicking game, though. Everyone kept bringing up the fact that the kicking game was not good. Again, in one practice, I'm not saying all those guys stink. That would be ridiculous. But it was bad on Saturday, obviously. Do you anticipate Oklahoma adding a kicker? And if so, what are some names there that could be possibilities? This is a spot that, Zach Schmidt ended up having a decent year last year. But, when the kicker spot is in flux, and that can really, really burn you. With as many close games as OU likes to play, you need a reliable kicker. Where are you at with this position as far as Oklahoma? Maybe looking to get someone else in there at that spot that could kind of solidify the special teams unit a little bit.
Look, I'll put it this way. You don't want to judge a position group off of the Crimson Combine, but right. I think that the judgment laid on the kicker position in the program definitely acknowledges the need. I mean, genuinely, you asked me if I expect them to add a kicker. I think they are desperate to add a kicker. I think that they are viewing kicker along with tight end and receiver as utmost priority in the spring. They want a guy to come in and just for them to know we have someone who can get us 3 points. And I know that kind of sounds ridiculous to say, but I'm not sure that that's the case as currently constructed. So the name to know that we reported, was that Tuesday? I think it was Tuesday that I put Mason Shipley in my daily updates. Oklahoma had just kind of put him on the radar. He is a graduate transfer kicker from Texas State. Shout out GJ Kinney and the Texas State Bobcats. Big fan of that crew over there. But Mason Shipley leaves the program and will have 1 season of eligibility remaining. I saw someone put out, I believe it was Kef, I don't know how to say his last name, Chiardello, but I've watched his stuff and monitored his stuff as someone who lives in Texas. He does a great job covering Texas State football. He put out the fact that Shipley is a 2-time Lou Groza Award watch list recipient, was a semifinalist in 2023, 31 of 35. That's good for an 88.57% clip in 3 seasons with the Bobcats. He also holds Texas State school records with most field goals in a season at 15 in 2023 and the longest make in program history of 54 yards back in 2022. So I know it'd be boring if I were just sitting here saying, hey, this guy is a good kicker. And then I moved on. You'd be like, all right, why are we even? But yeah, this guy is considered to be one of, if not the best available kicker in the spring window. And OU went into the spring window basically saying, we got to go get the best we can at that position. And now Mason Shipley, as we record this, is on campus. He is visiting Oklahoma. Staff is doing their thing, taking him through a tour right now. And there's a very real world where this thing moves quickly. Shipley's hearing from a number of other programs, but Oklahoma kind of zeroed in on this guy as someone they really like. We have seen what Doug Deacon can do. We've now seen what Jim Nagy can do. And if they're serious about someone like Shipley, man, it's interesting, especially with him being on campus, how this goes. And so even if it isn't Shipley, I would expect Oklahoma to be very aggressive at the kicker spot. And they want a new look specialist to come in and be their guy for 2025. The last thing I will add, though, because I think this is important, 1 season of eligibility for Shipley, which means, in theory, if you really like Liam, who you mentioned is a young guy, in-state guy, kicker, if you like the young kicker that you added in-state, but you don't think he's the guy yet, adding someone like Shipley for a season.
Yeah, you still 3 years of Evans after that. Yeah.
It's an all-encompassing plan, if you will. So that's the gist at the kicker spot.
Yeah, Shipley, you mentioned I even have him down here as making a 60-yarder last year.
Whoa!
For Texas State. Yeah, that's on their official website, 60-yarder last year. Yeah, no, I mean, his career, 31 of 35 in total field goal attempts. And, yeah, made a 60-yarder last year. I mean, you never know how a kicker's going to translate to the pressure of playing in front of 90,000. That's stuff you can't predict that stuff. You just have to get a guy who's good and then hope for the best from there. But they need a kicker. I think that's pretty clear. And we'll see if Shipley can end up being that guy, and if not, where they pivot to. We'll obviously keep an eye on that. But not something you want to. It feels a little like. And there are more important needs, but also it's like, man, a kicker can. OU fans know a kicker can cost you games. It burned Brent Venables a few times in his tenure, the kicking game.
Can win them games, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely can. Absolutely can. So we'll keep an eye on that for sure. All the portal coverage is at Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma.247sports.com. Collin's been absolutely all over it. A lot of coverage there. Tom does a great job with some analysis pieces afterwards of kind of where does this guy fit in. And so we got lots of coverage and obviously more to come. The window just opened yesterday, so we're just at the beginning of this little spring cycle. We do expect there to be more movement. Again, it's not going to be as insane as the winter, but there will be more movement. So be sure to subscribe and keep up so you can be on top of it and know what's going on over at Sooners Illustrated with all the stuff out of the portal. One last thing before you go, Collin, I did want to ask about the Crimson Combine a little bit from the recruiting perspective. We talked about it going in, that it was going to still be a pretty big recruiting weekend, not probably to the level of a spring game normally, but still a lot of guys were coming into town. You mentioned specifically some defensive line prospects that were of interest to you. What was kind of the reaction that you got coming out of this in terms of whether it's specific to a certain guy or just kind of in general? How did they feel about it? Because it was kind of a weird thing, and that was a big question I think a lot of us had was, do the players like this? Do recruits like this? Because it was obviously a bit of a different thing that they never done before.
Yeah, if I'm honest with you, I don't know how much stuff there is to say about the Crimson Combine specifically in relation to recruiting.
Sure.
What I would say about the weekend and its structure
the weekend
is, it's more like the Crimson Combine allowed them to be more one-on-one with these guys. And I would say that definitely paid off, because I think a highlight for a lot of these guys was they got to sit in on position meetings and they got to spend time with the position coaches in a more intimate setting.
Yeah.
And they got to watch these guys coach. They got to learn about the systems. They learned about like Oklahoma's theories behind positional drills or whatever else. And I just think in general, they were able to have conversations with these guys on staff that helped them kind of flush out some stuff that were on their minds. And I think that like Jake Kroll, one of the nation's best edge rushers, IMG Academy guy, recruited by some of the very best in the country, Oklahoma in there with Michigan, and a few others. OU, in my opinion, by way of the Crimson Combine weekend, really established itself as an option for Jake Kroll. I know that he's really liked OU's coaches. I think he has a really good relationship with Miguel Chavis, Brent Venables, so on. But I think that he got to pick Chavis's brain and Brent Venables' brain on, okay, how do I fit in the system? What is our intent in the system? What calls are we making and why? And then what would I be doing and how does that highlight my skill set? And I think you got to watch, listen, learn, and then vet some things. And I think now Oklahoma is legitimately someone that Kroll could choose when it's all said and done. Whereas maybe before the weekend, it was like, I really like Oklahoma, right?
Yeah.
Brett Callaway, another IMG guy, offensive lineman, he took his official visit during Crimson Combine weekend. And it's nice because they had him in for an OV multi-day trip. And it's like they had an event for him to kind of take in. But most of his experience in Norman on the OV was, let's talk. Let's chop it up. Let's see where you're at. Let's talk about it. Let's explain where we're at and what we need to do moving forward. And I think now Callaway is kind of in the same boat as Kroll in taking Oklahoma very seriously as an option. And I mean, Will Conroy is still committed to Oklahoma out of IMG and plays on the same offensive line as Breck, and he knows Jake. And so anyway, I think that OU did a good job with those two 2026 guys. 2027, I think you can make an argument that OU has a temporary lead in a sense for 2027 defensive lineman Jalen Brewster out of Cedar Hill. This is a guy I've been high on for a long time. And I think Brewster visited for the Crimson Combine, spent a lot of time with Todd Bates, brought a lot of his family up. They got to hang around Bates as well. And I know like Oregon and a couple of others are hovering here, but he showed up to Under Armour Houston the next day in OU gear and talked up Oklahoma. And yeah, I think he's high on Oklahoma. And then my guy, Tyson Robinson, 2027 running back out of the state of Mississippi. I saw him at Under Armour Nashville a couple of weeks ago. He told me that OU was definitely in the mix, but that his top two at the moment had been Alabama and Tennessee. He then goes on his trip to Norman shortly after that interview and gets to hang out with Marco Murray, who he has a lot of respect for. And I think that really helped Oklahoma as well cover a little bit of ground, if you will, with a guy that they really like. So, yeah, man, the moral of the story, spring games are really cool. You pack a ton of guys in and they get to watch kind of a quasi scrimmage, and it's awesome. Crimson Combine, I think we're all a little bit bummed, but OU definitely made the most of it off the field. And in a way, they definitely kind of got all the juice out of the weekend from a one-on-one exposure standpoint with a lot of these recruits.
Sure. So we'll see what they do moving forward with it. You know, we talk about if they stick with it next year or if they go back to more of a traditional spring game or just do nothing. I don't know. Just make it a full-on recruiting weekend. We'll find out. But we'll see in due time, I guess. And a lot of recruiting coverage is obviously on the website as well. Like Collin mentioned, he was at Under Armour Houston over the weekend. Our Blake and Koviak was there too. Didn't get that on the show, but there's a lot of coverage there. We might talk about that a little more next week. We'll see how things kind of shake out. But lots of recruiting stuff over on the website as well right now. We got lots of for it everywhere over at Oklahoma.247sports.com.
Yeah, this is the fun part where the transfer portal and recruiting intersect at the same time. And I'm just like, I was like that same weekend, I'm at Overtime's OT 7-on-7 tournament, trying to watch the Crimson Combine, catch up with those guys, then traveling on Armour Houston, and then the portal hits like a train. So it's like, this is going to be sick for the next few weeks. It's going to be so much fun.
Great time. I think that's it for now. We'll be back next week. Obviously, Tom, James, and myself on Monday. Recap the weekends for the Diamond Sports, any other portal movement. Obviously, we'll talk about as well. Anything else to get into on the basketball side, we will do so also on Monday. Collin and I will be back next Thursday. Recap all the latest in the portal, what's coming up, what's next, obviously all that good stuff. Like I said, might get into some other recruiting stuff with Under Armour Houston, all that. We'll see how the next week kind of shakes out. But we're back next Thursday to dive into all of that as well as we move into the back half of April already. We're scooting. It's going to be media days and season. I feel like before we know it, we found out that the OU media days, they're on day 3 of SEC media days. It's July 16th. So you can start playing. That's less than 3 months from today. So get ready, get the mind right. Be about that time before you know it. CK, appreciate you as always. Be back next week. We'll see you next time. Like I said, be back on Monday with Tom and James. For Collin Kennedy, I'm Josh Callaway. Signing off for now. We'll see you next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.